3 months on this motorcycle, this Triumph 500. Beautiful bike. It was a Triumph Trophy, meaning it had one carburetor, but it was a monster bike back then compared to the kind of European cars and European bikes, which were more, you would look at them now and say they were more like scooters. You know, I didn't know a thing about motorcycles. Wade Eldridge, my sophomore roommate, pulled me up from England. He said, "You've got to come over here, it's great, and we'll do Europe together. We'll do it on motorcycles." And I said, "Well, wait, I've never been on a motorcycle." "That's okay, I'll teach you how to do it." So I wired him over money, and he bought this Triumph 500. It was a beautiful bike. And I get to Leicester. He was going to school, University of Leicester. And he had just finished up and I landed, and he taught me how to ride that bike. Well, when you're 20, you learn pretty quickly. So I was on that bike and we were off within a week and did all of England, but Wade had undergone a lot of change. These were volatile times. These are the times the switchover from the 50s and early 60s to the 70s, the Vietnam War. And what you really had, and one of the things that happened were drugs. Drugs were nowhere at all in our society in the 50s. In the 60s, the only people who did drugs were really down and outers. People on the Bowery, and you were really down and out. And it spread, though, the drugs with the counterculture into the colleges and into some of the high schools. And I was kind of one of those changeovers. So my first 2 years at Duke was very much the old traditional way of things were done. But beginning my junior year, the drug culture kind of came over. In fact, we had the sit-in on the quad, and we had the strike and brought the National Guard on campus. And so we went from that. But when I went to see Wade had already undergone that in his junior year at the University of Leicester, whereas I really had not partaken in any of that, and he was way into the drug culture. So our trip somewhat aborted as he spent all his money on drugs. And we rode around together. Of course, our riding around together consisted of we'd go from one town to the next, and then like as soon as we get into town, he'd look for some long-haired kid to say, "Hey man, where can I buy some dope?" And so he'd be off buying dope, and I didn't do anything like that. Maybe we'd make it to another town, or maybe he was definitely in the mellow mood. He was indiscriminate and would do uppers and downers and any other kind of drug at that time. He's actually a lawyer now. He's a criminal defense lawyer. Anyway, so we did southern England, Stonehenge, Wells, Cheddar, where cheddar cheese comes from, and Stratford. The countryside's beautiful, and summer is really glorious. I remember learning to drink cider, hard cider. I did that I think it was Somerset. I went to a pub there, and I asked them what was local, and the pubs were fun because you could just go down, and it was really easy to talk. And they loved to talk politics throughout Europe, but particularly in London, because of course I could speak English better than I could speak the French that I had learned. And they said, "Oh, we'll try this hard cider." So you have a couple glasses of hard cider, and then you go to stand up. And that stuff, it had so much alcohol in it, man, practically the room would spin around. Maybe it wasn't two, maybe I had 4 of them, I don't know. But that's when I learned how lethal hard cider can be. So I had the motorcycle by myself. We had done England together, but he said, "Oh yeah, why don't you go to Paris and I'll meet up with you?" But he never actually made it there. So it was somewhat disappointing, because motorcycle is the kind of thing you want to do with somebody else and not do by yourself. Because if you meet a girl, I mean, they can't easily ride on the back. Around town you can do that, but you can't go cross country with somebody riding on the back of your motorcycle. I was saved by, there were a lot of people I knew and friends who were doing Europe that same year, so I would kind of, even though I wouldn't travel with them, I'd meet up with friends in various cities. From Chamonix, France, through Switzerland, through Italy, all the way down to Rome in one day. It was about 500 miles. That's a long way to go on a motorcycle in one day. Can't believe I did that. That is totally insane. Maybe towards on the Rome side of Florence, when my motorcycle started to go slower and slower. And it was fixed by an Italian mechanic. And on the way back up into Italy, I got as far as Florence and I broke down again. At this point, I decided, I need to put it on a train, get it back to Great Britain and get it fixed. So I put it on a train, shipped it to Coventry, and I took the train to Coventry, England, where they fixed it. And I watched them. I wheeled it in, and with that they kind of loosened the bolts on the engine, threw the engine into a great big pile of engines. I mean, a huge pile. There must have been 100 engines thrown into a big pile, and they put on a new engine, and off I went again, which was kind of amazing to me, because it was not, I mean, that bike was expensive, but it was amazing. And they just did it and didn't charge me anything. I really hadn't done anything wrong. It was a brand new bike, and all of a sudden it scarred the cylinder and blew out all the oil, and cylinder freezes up. A lot of it was, you know, you were trying to meet girls, and so you go to places to meet girls. I took off from London, went over to Paris. The tunnel was not built then, so you'd have to take a ferry. Some of the highlights I remember doing mountain climbing in Chamonix. Went to rock climbing school and actually climbed one of the Aiguilles Verts is the name of it. It means green needle. Did not climb Mont Blanc. They had the tunnel. I think about this time they were opening the tunnel. It was pretty much in France, and then down to Italy, and then back to France. Then I made it to the Netherlands and Great Britain.
So did you go to Amsterdam?
I did go to Amsterdam. Yeah, that was very interesting back then. The drug culture was truly in vogue then. So I ran into Frank Bourne and David Wagner. There was a rock club called the Paradiso. It was a converted church. And in the Paradiso, I have this vivid recollection of walking in. It was one of these places that they were projecting movies on a couple of the walls, and then they had live music going, and lots of smoke, lots of marijuana smell. And in fact, you would walk under, and you'd enter in 5 different languages and great big signs saying no trafficking in drugs. And then you get about under that sign, and some guy came up to me, said, "Hey man, you want to buy some hash?" And then proceeds to go like this and give me a stick of hash that was like this long. Now, I'd never smoked hash, but it was this long, and it looked like kind of a cigar almost. And I'm holding it, and where did he go? And I'm with my friends Wagner and Bourne, and they say, "Oh, don't worry about it. He'll keep his eye on you." They're not going to, I mean, that would be a lot of money back then to buy hash. So, you know, it was memorable. There were a lot of students, but also a lot of kind of young people that maybe were not in school, but maybe they were working, maybe not. Lots of the long hair, and whatever you could do in Amsterdam. It was a time of freedom. So that might mean that women would have the braless look, which went through most of my college. So you'd have women and trying to be liberated from conventional standards. You'd have the drug culture. You'd have the anti-Vietnam War movement, the peace symbol, the miniskirt. Yeah, the miniskirt. These were just my times, which were really totally different. It was an interesting time to live in. So that's a little bit about my trip.